Thank you all for being here. I'm sure you can see that we take this issue very seriously, and I think all of us are a little concerned about the short time frame that has been suggested. I would like to focus a little bit on testing for impairment, and there's a lot of ambiguity around how that would work. And the other day I was speaking to two security officers, RCMP actually, and I asked them, is there a test for impairment? And I know from discussing with medical doctors that we are all individually different, so our ability to have THC in our system and not be impaired varies with each individual and their usage. So first of all, do you think if you're on medical marijuana, it would be handy to have a regime where you can be permitted to have THC in your system for medical reasons, but in safety sensitive workplaces there could be a request for zero tolerance? That would be my first one. I know that that may not sit well, but when I'm looking at zero tolerance, I would say if there is a test and you don't pass the zero, that you have remedial action, not thrown out the door, because we have a lot of very good people and we need everybody to work in our country. So my second question that I asked the RCMP, so that's number one. Second is, I said to them, what I've been told that the best test for impairment, no matter what the agent of impairment is can you put your finger to your nose and can you walk a straight line? And are we looking at doing some kind of apps that where you would be able to photograph on a phone, mobile device, a person's response to will you do these three things, and maybe put a couple of cones out and photograph it? Because the officer said, we agree that's the best way to test for impairment, but we don't want to have to defend a subjective test in the courts. So I'm thinking we should think outside the box, away from the breathalyzers and the saliva test, and look at something that would work in the field. So your comments on that.
Who are you directing the question to?
I think maybe Mr. Hines and also Mr. Youssef, because I'm concerned about...
Okay, we'll start with Mr. Hines.
I'm going to start. I'm going to defer to my friend who is a much greater expert than I when it comes to testing. But what I will say is your point around medical marijuana. When we've had discussions and we've looked at this issue, there's really sort of two streams, two buckets of information here. On the one side, there's the medical use of this drug, for which there is human rights legislation that employers adhere to today. If an employee is using such a substance, any substance that is prescribed by a medical professional, an employer has a duty to accommodate under the Human Rights Act that employee, and that is already being done, and that isn't going to change in the future. Then we have the recreational piece, which is the one that really causes us a greater amount of concern, because the controls around that, the knowledge around that is more unknown. So Chris can speak more clearly about the testing.
Yeah, well, so I think, Senator, your question's a good one. I'd reemphasize what Derek really just said. We deal with, in our organization, as I mentioned, we've been doing this for a long time, we deal with medical marijuana. That's just a fact. People have prescriptions, and what you do is obviously you need to manage it, especially in a safety-sensitive environment. Are there other options that are available to take? For instance, the basic test, and it was touched on before, is are they fit for duty? That's the real question at the end of the day. Whether they're taking Tylenol 3, 15 of them, it's a legal substance, but they may not be, they shouldn't be driving a truck, as an example, right? So we manage around that issue today. It's certainly more complicated, medical marijuana than maybe other issues. The concern we would have, obviously, with recreational is, based on Colorado, and we've got some stats in there, with the increase, especially in the adult population, is we're just going to be dealing with more of this, right? And that's the big concern at the end of the day. I think the testing, I understand your question on the testing. I'm not a testing expert per se, but I keep going back to what's been done. The breathalyzer is no different from what you said from marijuana. I might be 0.04, you may be 0.08, but there's a recognition that, the courts were satisfied in the Entraub case with 0.04. We consider that impairment. You're never going to have a perfect impairment test, but I think where they've come, and we've mentioned it, TTC, CN, and using saliva, that's there. It's not immediate. You have to send it to the lab, so you may have a 3-day lag, but that testing is basically there. So I think in our minds, that's the appropriate measure, is to go with the saliva testing, because it's really gotten to that point. That's my thoughts on it. Thanks.
Okay, now let me move on to Senator, I'm sorry, we didn't get the other comments.
I'm just,
Very
I don't want to
quickly.
interrupt the chair and get thrown out of the Senate here. But let me be brief. We don't have, and I don't think there's any agreement in regard to what test is accurate in regard to cannabis. There is no agreement. My friends are citing some testing that are being used. That does not mean we agree on this. This is just employers have decided this is their approach to it, and so be it at the end of the day. Those will be litigated through the process and will determine. In regard to alcohol, yes, there is agreement. Generally, most of the tests has been around as long as it's been established to have scientific value and of use, of course, to ensure that they're accurate, and I think that's been concluded. And the last point I think my friend addressed, there is, of course, recognition of duty to accommodate for individuals that, of course, for pain and whatever, that needs to be accommodated. And, of course, those requirements are such that people would not be in sensitive positions in which they could affect the lives or other people within the workplace if they are using cannabis for medical reasons at the end of the day.